Hello and welcome to A Girl, a Guy, and a Buffy podcast. I'm one of your hosts. I'm Charles Swint.
Hey, and I'm Kate Balzer.
And we're two friends who've been watching Buffy since the beginning. We are not a rewatch podcast. We explore the big bad themes of the show, and this podcast is chock full of spoilery goodness. So if you have not watched the entire series and don't want to be spoiled, press pause now. So, Kate, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing on
I
this
am.
rainy day
I know. These are days that I just kind of want to curl up and not
and
do
watch
anything
Buffy?
and watch Buffy and just not do anything.
Yeah.
But no, they made me work today, so
Oh, the
ugh.
horror. What are they thinking? Did
And
you actually
Lisa's,
have to go in?
I did,
At least if you're
which made it work.
home, makes it a little bit better.
I could have been watching Buffy this whole time, but
You could have been cozy on the
no.
couch in a warm blanket while
I
doing
know.
work.
Watching some Buffy, that
Just
just
tell them
sounds,
I'm so much more productive when I have Buffy on in the background.
aren't we all?
Well,
Aren't
that would
we?
not be true for me. I'd be easily distracted, but
Yeah. So I guess at some point, you gotta you gotta roll with it.
exactly. So I'm really excited about today's topic, and I want to give an additional spoiler warning before we get into it and share what the question is, that there will be spoilers up the wazoo for Angel as well, because of who we're covering today. Covers both shows for sure.
Yes.
So today our question is, so continuing with the theme for this back half of season three, we're discussing friends and family in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And so our question is around our four favorite vampires. Well, I'm assuming they're most everyone's favorite vampires, but are Darla, Angelus, Drusilla, and Spike a family?
My favorite vampire is Edward Cullen. How
Oh,
dare
please.
you?
You cannot, I'm sorry, no offense to people out there, but you cannot be a Buffy fan and a Twilight fan. I'm sorry. You could be a fan of other vampire things. I'm sorry, not Twilight. He sparkles. I'm sorry.
Vampires do not sparkle.
Vampires do sparkle.
I mean, goodness. I'm kidding, people. I am kidding. I hate Twilight, y'all. Um, it's anyway.
You're
We
gonna
won't
get
get.
us canceled for
I
that.
know. I know. There's so many things that I could say about it. Anyway, I stand. You know
Moving
what?
on,
I
let's
stand.
talk about our vampires.
I stand by that statement. Um, but our vampires, Darla, Angel, Drusilla, and Spike. Yeah, and so one of the things that we were talking about, and that in our pre-show meeting and preparing to talk about this, is that at least thinking about like how vampires show up in media and how they're portrayed, or even in Buffy itself, like
Hmm.
how vampires show up. They like when they are as a collective, I guess I would say, like
Yeah.
they usually show up as like a gang or a crew or something like that. If you look back at like Harmony, or if you're looking at Sunday or anything like that, like they show up and they refer to themselves as a crew or a gang or something like that.
Hmm.
And then, and looking back at other, at other vampires and pop culture, like you don't see a lot of family, structures in there. That there's more of a like there does feel like more of a hierarchical structure. Although I think maybe in sort of post Buffy worlds, we get
Hmm.
more of that than we did before Buffy.
I think that's a really good point. And actually, if I think about the stories that do make the vampires in their world more family, even if they aren't like literally biological family, but found
Right.
family, it's used in a way to elevate those characters as if they are, like the creme de la creme of that society.
Hmm.
So you think about, I think a little bit you could say that in Twilight. I know we were talking about a discovery of witches, the main vampire in that book, and then his found family,
Hmm.
and also family through both siring and found family. they're very wealthy. They've been leaders over the years. They're a leader in the vampire community. So I think it's interesting. It's used as a classification and a stratification in even in the vampire world. It's like, oh, these are the like noble or
Yeah.
noble in sense of nobility with the money. They're the upper class versus like gangs, which are just like have such a negative connotation to them.
Hmm.
And in the Buffy verse, they're certainly like the fodder for Buffy to slay in the episodes. Whereas you have the Order of Aurelius, and those vampires end up sticking around over and over. They're brought back in various ways, and then we end up having this core four of Angelus, Darla, Drusilla, and Spike. So again, there's even like a stratosphere and a class difference in Buffy.
And that, I mean, yeah, and they even that or even the Order of Aurelius is very like elevated. Like there,
Yeah.
it's a very much, we see Darla like she's very much a lady of status.
Hmm.
Coming into this when you look back, during the 1800s and all of that, and everyone else is sort of like rough and tumble,
Yeah.
sort of street trash or whatever, and they're just like by their wits and all of that stuff, and the rest of them are like, I don't have time for that. I have like,
Yeah.
and I guess it could be a way of like protection. I think those families last longer, or those
Yeah.
clans or clatches or whatever you want to call them survive longer because of that, because they've figured out how to work their way through society and sort of stay undetected. And I think so, yeah, I think you kind of see it too, maybe a little bit in Interview with a Vampire.
Yeah,
You
that's true
know,
too. Yes. Can't leave
um,
them out. Yeah. Well, and also going back to Buffy, I mean, the Master is all about ritual. And
mhm.
he very much talks about family. I mean, it's very dark and twisted when you hear him speak about it, but he thinks of the vampires around him in a family,
As his children.
right, as his children, in a familial way.
Hmm.
But then, it's also very much about the ritual and hierarchy, and he's at the top and he expects those below him to, follow along. So it's also very like patriarchal,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Yeah.
It's
Um,
like an even darker, twisted take on patriarchy.
I mean, it certainly is that, and yeah, for sure with them. If I mean, and it sort of falls a little bit away on the wayside when once we get down to the core four. That's
Yes, yes.
far less the case for sure. But um, I mean, I think it actually kind of becomes more matriarchal.
Hmm.
And I think that's probably intentional. I would imagine that there was some intentionality behind that.
Yeah, I think it's all,
Maybe. I don't know.
yeah, I don't know, but I think interestingly, it's both a breaking away from the old ways and the master and, the two women in the group having a bit more. It's a balance of partnerships to the degree where sometimes even Darla is more power over Angelus.
Hmm.
And, you could definitely make the case where Drusilla has more power over Spike because of how he is in relationships,
Hmm. Yeah.
particularly with women he's in love with, as we have discussed in our previous episode. But I think there's that element as, Darla takes that step to break away because she's really feels like she's found who she was looking for in Angelus, and she'd rather be with him than under the with the master until she loses Angelus and has to basically retreat back to the master.
Hmm.
But then there's also they just evolve a bit to become more modern vampires. I mean, especially when you get Spike in there and he wants to throw his past off. He wants to throw not only like who he was as a human, but the fact that he grew up in this very structured, rigid Victorian society. So
Hmm.
you also, I think that's also partly why they um, meld together as a group. They're breaking a lot of tradition and sort of forming this new way of being a vampire family.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's so tricky with this one too because of how we sort of get the information of their
Yes,
story, and that
yes,
it's so told out of order. And like we said before, like Darla shows up but in the beginning, but she's kind of this different person
right.
in the first in those first few episodes that we see her, like we know that there's that connection with Angel, but it just doesn't like it doesn't have the same feel. She's
Yeah,
not quite the same character necessarily um that we get like later on in Angel.
right.
And when we get those flashbacks and how that looks and
Hmm.
all of that, we get a more fleshed out, a more fully realized Darla.
Yes.
Um, and so sort of tracking all of that that um can get a little confusing, I think, and
Yeah.
it does at least in my head. So I feel like looking at all of that is gonna be helpful of like the timeline of
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
how this all starts, right?
Yeah.
Um and
Um,
yeah.
well, oh no, I was just gonna say, before we get into that, I just want to give a shout out to Buffy Wiki because this is where I pulled all the information from. For the most part, I think I had to go to IMDb too to look at some of the episodes to make sure I wasn't missing, but they had a lot of information that I pulled this timeline we put together. So I just want to give them a shout out and thank you for being a valuable research or resource when doing research.
Woohoo! Yay, Buffy Wiki. Um, so according to this, so it's 1609, correct? That's when this all starts.
Yep.
Um,
As far as the information we're given, because we obviously
right,
don't know like when the master is sired, who's his sire. So
right, because we only know about the master. We don't know past
correct.
past him. Um, but that's such a long lineage. Like if we're talking about 1609, and that's
Oh,
when
and he looked like Batface in
right,
that flashback. So that means
right
he's been around for like
for
forever.
ever.
Yeah, so I mean, we were talking he could be like 1,000 years old as a vampire by the time he like sires Darla. Because, obviously they don't do anything that with them in as far as mythology, because the Master's the only bat face we we ever get.
Right. But you would have to imagine that like
Yeah.
that also gives um sort of the impression too that if you look at this is interesting because if you look at other vampires on the show, like
Hmm.
the idea is that like you're a vampire, you were um you're like at that age, you're not aging
Right.
anymore or whatever, but that is clearly not. Although we really only see him in Vamp Face too, like we never see him out.
Yeah, I feel like there's a throwaway line at some point where they do talk about like he's evolved to be that way.
Right,
It's not like he was some sort of demon that got like turned into a vampire.
right.
So,
Like as a human, like this is like the evolution of what it means. The longer
correct.
you are a vampire, this is
Right.
more what this looks like. Although keeps his
Oh,
vamp face on.
he's not the only one because remember also Kakistos.
Takistos, yeah.
Yeah, so there are
Th-
two. I forgot. So
yeah,
there
that's what I
and
was thinking about some of
yeah.
the other
Yes, I forgot about that.
vampires that are like deformed, quote unquote deformed looking
Right.
and aren't like the pretty ones, or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, and I think that I mean his name was Greek, so I can't recall, but do they say he goes back to like ancient Greece? Um, I'm gonna guess they probably did, or I'm making that up. But anyway, yeah. So obviously, like super super old vampires
Right.
can
So at some point you do start to age and deform as a
correct.
vampire. But that takes like
Yeah,
thousands of years.
yeah,
We're assuming. We're
Uh,
making that assumption.
yeah.
Um,
Well, you know what? If they're not gonna world build, we're gonna world build
we're
for in our
gonna
own
do it
head
for it.
canon.
Build again. Because those are also, and again, I know it's like part of the makeup and stuff like that, but those are also vampires who have chosen, at least in my head, have chosen to abandon their humanity
Mm,
and
hmm.
live only as a vampire.
Yeah,
So
that's
it
a
would
really good
be
point.
interesting to see like what they would look like if they weren't in vamp face.
Hmm.
Because we never see them out of face. They always, have the face on. They exist as the demon. So, it would be interesting to see what they look like. And maybe at a certain point, you can't. live with that human face anymore. I don't
Hmm.
know. Or
Yeah, something you said too just sparks a really good point in the fact that the whirlwind vampires, to use a shortcut to describe the four of them, for all their horrible acts and their evilness, they hold on to many aspects of their humanity, whether it's like Angelus, um, kind of you could argue that a lot of what he does is basically to like get back at his father.
mhm,
And that Darla loves to live in luxury. Like she doesn't want to live like the master down in the sewers of London or, um, and the relationship between Drusilla and Spike. So yeah, it's interesting. So maybe that's also part of it. Like I love that idea that part of it is age, but part of it is the actions you take, like whether you hold on to aspects of your humanity, even if,
mm,
you're still soulless, still committing evil acts. There's elements of that where you feel like there's really nothing left of humanity in the master.
right. And I'm
I don't
trying to,
even think he really cares
yeah,
for his vampires, even Darla, who he probably quote unquote loves the most.
right. She is. And I'm trying to think too, just thinking back about Luke, and we never really saw him out of Vamp Face either. I don't
True.
think
And it's probably
so.
a money thing. It was just
It's
easier to keep them.
absolutely, absolutely.
But
Um,
yeah, to the point of the world building we're making up on our headcanon.
right, that like maybe he, that he too is like a much older one and is choosing to
Hmm.
not hold on to his humanity as much. But we
Yeah.
see that Darla ha is goes back and forth because she's still, you know, straddling those two worlds.
Hmm.
But Darla was sired by the Master back in 1609.
And she's, well, from the Virginia colony.
Yes.
So
Um, so she go way back.
yeah, to the point where Darla's not her real name.
Yeah.
Because
We
as Angel says in the episode, he realizes that name didn't come into fashion until after she had been sired.
hmm So we don't even know her real
Yeah,
name.
we don't know her real name.
Who is she? And then we fast forward to 1753, in Galway, Ireland, where Darla sires Angelus.
Hmm.
And then in 1760, in London, Darla introduces Angelus to the master. She's bringing home her boo to see dad. Daddy, look who I met. Isn't he dreamy? Isn't he just the best? He's the bee's knees. Um, so- and she, and then she, but then because Angelus is such a like a wild card, and he's
Yeah.
like the rebel with a, he's like, no, I don't want to do that, and that breaks up that whole relationship. And she's like, I'm running away with him. You can't stop me. Um, so off she goes, running off, and then we hit 1860. So now we're jumping ahead about 100 years here. Did I do that math right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
No.
yeah, yeah,
Okay. I was like, 'cause I was,
yeah,
I was looking at the numbers and I said the words and I was like,
yeah.
wait.
Well, and I will say there's obviously stuff in between that, but since we're focusing on these four as a family, I didn't put in stuff for um anything related to Holtz or other vampires we learned about in Angel in that in between time because it's not directly related to our discussion of the four of them as a family.
Right. Right. Because there is a lot of Holtz chasing them around
Yeah, I mean that's
Europe during
all,
all
and
this
then
time.
there's James and Elizabeth, who are kind of like the proto Drusilla and Spike.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
and then there's Penn, obviously, another early performance by Jeremy Renner, who would go on to be well known from the Marvel verse.
And then we have 1860 London. Darla finds Drusilla and puts her on Angelus's radar. And then, of course, Angelus becomes very taken with Drusilla and obsessed with her and tortures her, plays mind games with her, and then sires her. on the day that she's supposed to take her orders as a nun. Then we've got 1880 London. Drusilla sires William, because he's looking for something effulgent. And then Angelus, he's getting more anxious and bothered by this relationship between Spike and Drusilla. Um, and so Angelus betrays growing brotherhood by taking uh Drusilla, and he's just like, you can't have it. Like nothing is yours. Isn't that the
Yeah. Hmm.
situation where he's like,
You can
she's
take
not
what
your
you want, but like
girlfriend. You
nothing is yours. Yeah.
yeah.
Something like that.
Um so then we go to so then in the same year in Yorkshire, um Angelus and William are arguing over how to be vampires. Um and then Angelus tells William about slayers, and he's like, oh, which makes William very obsessed about the idea of finding them and hunting them down. Then we have 1898 Romania. Let me see here. What is this? Darla brings Calderash to Angelus, and then Angelus rapes and kills.
You didn't say that she's a young woman.
Oh, well, yes, Calderash is the young woman, a young
Yeah.
woman from the Calderash clan. Let's say that. So then he rapes and kills her, and then that is when the Calderash clan curses Angel with a soul, and Darla kicks him out. And then Darla, Spike, and Drew go after the Calderash clan, and Darla tries to have the curse reversed. That does not work. Then we've got the 1900s. Then we skip to the 1900s where China Boxer Rebellion. Spike defeats his first Slayer. Angel tries to rejoin the family with a soul, but can't be that evil again. Then we get the 19th. So then we fast forward. So that's a huge. Then we jump forward to 1943, the Atlantic Ocean. Angel and Spike reunite on a German sub. So that's not that far apart, really, from when that
Mm-mm.
happens. And then we fast forward to 1997, 1998, where Darla reunited with Angel. Darla was killed by Angel. Spike and Drew come to Sunnydale, and then they reunite uh, as a family after Angel loses his soul. So Angelus joins Drusilla and Spike. 2000, we are in Los Angeles, and Drusilla resires Darla after Darla has been resurrected by Wolfram and Hart and brought back to life as a human, um, and a human who is dying of syphilis because that's what she was dying of before. And so when she comes back, that's all happening. And then in Los Angeles in 2003, Spike and Angel forced to work together and confront their past during an opera house fight. And that's kind of where we get up to. So that's sort of the order. It all happens in order. It's interesting because we don't know when. It's hard to say when Spike and Drusilla get back to. I mean, when do they reconnect again after the sub? Because she's not with him when they're on the submarine, and where
Yeah,
they
I mean, I
took.
think it's stated that like they parted and came back together.
They're like an on again, off again
Yeah.
thing all the time.
Yeah. And
Um,
I think they were off again and he got tricked by the free virgin blood. So, so dumb.
so yeah,
Um,
they have a lot of on again, off again, off screen
yeah.
stuff that happens.
Yeah.
Because then they break up because she's with the demon with the antlers.
Well, yeah,
Uh,
that's after
that's
they leave Sunnydale after becoming part two.
right, right. Um, so they go back and forth all the time. But I think just in terms of remembering like how that all happened, especially that later stuff, because all of that stuff shows up in a lot of that stuff is you learn in Angel and not necessarily on Buffy.
Right. Correct. Most of it, I think we learn on Angel, particularly during when Darla comes back into his life.
Right. Yeah, we get a lot of that. I mean, there's one
Yeah,
or two
mostly
or
on Buffy,
three.
we learn about Angel getting why he got the curse and what he did when he was sired, what he did to Drusilla, and then Spike's story in Fool for Love. All the rest of it is from Angel.
Right. And a lot of it through like Dollar's point of view now that she's back and
Yeah,
doing all of that stuff. Yeah.
right.
Um,
Plus, there's a whole bunch more of their past. Like I said, we also see an Angel that doesn't directly tie into this conversation. So we see the stuff about Penn, James and Elizabeth. I can't remember. Oh, obviously all the Holt stuff.
yeah,
So
coming back
yeah.
and then killing Holtz's family and doing all of that stuff, which is, you know. So with all of that, I mean, I guess it is the question like, do, in terms of family, I think really the only person who's really referring to them as a family, a lot of times, at least on screen, typically is like, well, Darla does. Darla mentions it a little bit.
Hmm.
And I think it's in Welcome to the Hellmouth when she's talking to Jesse and she's
Right.
like, I've got family who lives here, you know, and you'll meet them soon. You know, there's that, but like Drusilla does a lot of talking to them and say, "Oh, we're a family again." When Angelus comes back, she's like, "Oh, we're a family again." She refers to Darla um as her mother, grandmother, her grandmother plus or grandmother slash daughter.
Yeah.
I think that's how she refers to her. Um, and for her, all her little dollies are her children.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, I think in terms of that, there is that sort of familial connection and how they operate. I mean, it definitely feels like a chosen. I mean, it's definitely a chosen family for
Oh,
sure.
for sure. It's
You
yeah,
know.
it's not your traditional definition of a family. But I mean, I think in a lot of ways they are because it has in the sense that they're always, you kind of often hurt the ones you're closest to,
Hmm.
and then the like coming together and going apart, but always coming back together again, having that sh long, deep shared history. I think those things elevate it to a family level versus maybe just a gang or a, crew sort of
Yeah.
definition.
Yeah, it doesn't have the same feel of like, hey, let's get the crew back together for one last heist.
Yeah, like if you were to compare to like what Sunday has put together in the freshman episode
Right.
to them, you would definitely say very different groups. Like, so the Spike, Drusilla, Darlin, and Angelus do not feel like a gang or a crew, like Sunday's gang and crew does feel.
Because she's very much like, I'm in charge. This is about
Yeah.
me, where they are more like, we're each kind of doing our own thing,
Hmm.
but we're doing our own thing together
Yeah.
and hanging out. I also wonder too how, because we don't have, just because it doesn't exist, but like, had something like Sunday's Gang or even Harmony's Gang or whatever, like, had something else like that existed for as long as they have,
Hmm.
you know, would that dynamic change into more of a familial thing? But they sort of like gel in that way pretty much off the bat. Like they're very much together in that way very early on. Because when we look at that timeline, and I think this is something that we talked about offline, like looking at that timeline, they're not together that long.
No, because they only make Angelus only sires Drusilla in 1860. She just sires William in 1880, and 18 years later, and Angelus is cursed with the soul. So I mean, they're really only all together for like 18 years
Yeah.
as a
Uh,
foursome, and yet there's so much history there. There's so much emotional baggage that really like ties them together.
and also like and the fact that like the amount of destruction that they
Yeah.
caused during all that time, like because even like the chasing, you know, we see like Holt's chasing. I mean, they were together, I guess, a little bit longer, but it's just like they've so much happened in such a short amount of time.
Hmm.
Um, I guess because they were so high profile, they were doing so much.
Yeah.
you know, scourgy damage.
Yeah, it's interesting. Never had this thought before. It just popped in my head. But for all that Darla comes off as sort of in a leadership position, in a lot of ways, and granted, this is obviously because of how they had to tell the story, but if you take that aspect out of it, again, as we always say in these discussions, kind of take the real world aspect out, you could really argue that Angelus is the linchpin of the family because we never get any info about after he leaves them of Drusilla and Spike encountering Darla again.
Right, that's true.
You know,
Because like we would assume that at some point she goes back to the master
yeah.
to be with him, and so maybe she goes underground
But
with
do you think
him.
she went for like 100 years? Because it would have been essentially 100 years.
Yeah,
I feel like she probably went off to try and do her own thing. Maybe she even tried harder to figure out a way to uncurse Angelus, but then eventually made her way back to the master. Yeah, you just get no sense or implication that she ever crossed paths again with Spike
right,
and Drusilla. And she may have, like, but there seems to be no intentionality of that happening.
right.
We're
But
never given that or any implication of that.
there's some great fan fiction in there somewhere, I
Oh, I'm sure it's definitely been written.
bet. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, because there's just we just all we know is that she ends up back with the master after
right.
Angel. So I guess, and so I mean, do I think that they are family-ish? Yes, kind of. I would say yes.
I mean, they're definitely, like we said, found family. And there's also a lot of dark, unhealthy aspects to that because obviously there's also sexual relationships between them,
Right.
sort of vampire versions of love between them. Um, but I definitely think there is a familial element to their relationship that elevates them, as we were saying, beyond a gang or a crew.
Hmm. They are definitely connected in a way that others aren't.
Hmm.
And I think that they are fond of each other too.
Hmm.
And like a really fond, like genuinely fond of each other because like even when Spike comes and sees, every time they run into each other, whenever Spike and Angel run into each other, Spike's always like, "Hey man, what's going on? It's so good to see you. It's been so long."
Yeah. In School Heart. Yeah.
And
That's what
even
you're
yeah, in
referring to,
School
right?
Heart, and
Yeah.
even in the submarine too. Like when they're in the
Oh,
submarine,
I
they're
forgot.
like,
Yes, of course. Yeah,
he's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
"Oh hey, how's it going?"
Well, then
Um,
also there's Darla and Drusilla definitely have like this twisted version of like this girlfriend, not romantic girlfriend, but like two friends,
yeah,
relationship like that. Like when you think about the fact after Drusilla resires her, and again, it's like this twisted way, but they like go off shopping and they go off like killing together, and
they have a girls'
it's
day.
like there's and the one thing I've forgotten this timeline because I forgot there was a flashback to it in the episode, but during the episode about the immortal, and we flash back that the immortal had a three-way with Drusilla and Darla. So
I
I'm
was
trying
just
to
thinking
make,
about that. Yeah.
and obviously the two of them were like happy to be together and that, in that threesome. I mean, he apparently has magical powers that talk them into it, but and then they kind of go off and they're like, "Oh, you dumb boys, like don't ruin our fun."
Right.
In the flashback. So I think, they very much had a relationship too. I think Darla just only has the patience for relationship stuff for so long, and then she would probably like run off and do something else, and then when
Yeah.
she got bored and missed them would come back.
And you know what's really interesting, and maybe we've talked about this before on the podcast, and maybe we've talked about it off, but in that relationship and in that foursome, you see the dynamics between Angel and Spike. You see the dynamics between
Hmm.
Spike and Drusilla. You see
Hmm.
the dynamics between Drusilla and Darla, but you never see a dynamic between Darla and Spike.
It's so true.
They have basically like zero interaction with each other, even
Yeah,
though they're in scenes together. Like she kind of like there's a little bit, but there's not. I mean,
there's
there's no
not
like
much at all.
story between
Yeah,
them. She's just like, oh, he's like a little pet. He's like, oh, whatever, it's fine.
he keeps Drusilla occupied.
Right, when she doesn't want to be
Yeah,
bothered.
or when she's having one of her fits, he's there to take care of her.
Yeah. but she
When you
doesn't.
think about it, they got lucky that he's so like such a romantic at heart and so
Hmm.
obsessive with the women he's in love with that he was willing to do that and didn't be like, "What are you talking about? I'm a vampire. You can't make me do anything. I don't want to take care of her. I'll see you later."
Right, because he could have just run off.
Yeah.
Um,
But that's also shows you none of them do that. None of them like abandon her for the
right.
most part, like so it's interesting. They there is like this family
Well,
element that keeps drawing them and back together.
and I think too, part of that is because they see the value in her.
Yeah,
like they
true.
sought her out too because of her visions and
Of
because that
course.
they thought that was a useful thing to have. So, you know, it makes sense that they wouldn't.
Right.
I mean, he didn't have to drive her completely insane before he turned her.
He didn't
Um,
have to drive her insane at all. Who knows? Her visions might have been more useful if he hadn't.
and if he hadn't done all of that, but who cares?
Well, yeah.
She's there and she's great. She's so in all of that, I think we've covered a good bit of that. So you should definitely, I think if you aren't watching Angel and want to learn more about this group, I think definitely check out some Angel episodes uh that
Yeah,
will
I mean, personally, I wish they had actually done more flashbacks. Those
yeah.
I thought were some of the more interesting episodes of Angel, and I always wanted to know more of his backstory than some of the stuff they did in the present time.
Yeah.
I think that would have been a way better show. I think they tried to keep it, even though they were like, we're trying to do its own thing. And he's, it's like the 20-year-old out of college living in the big city for the first time, which he really wasn't. But that was sort of part of the vibe they were doing with Angel. But they were still trying to keep elements of like the way Buffy was done.
Hmm.
And I was like, you should have gone like way more off on your own. Cause I was like, that's where the like good nuggets were.
Yeah.
Not to veer off into a critique of Angel the series. But yes, those are definitely episodes I think are worth watching, even if you don't want to watch the entire Angel series.
Yeah, there's some yeah, and there's a good because there's that crossover episode too
Hmm.
that's in there. Um, so definitely worth a watch for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're definitely one messed up family.
But a
They are
family
interesting to
nonetheless.
watch. Yeah, exact family nonetheless.
A family.
Exactly. Well, we'd love to hear from you. What do you think? Are Spike, Drusilla, Angelus, and Darla a family? Are they a crew, a gang? What's the difference? You can email us at abuffypodcast@gmail.com. And if you're not already, please follow us on social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook at a Buffy podcast. And we would love for you to rate and review this episode and any other episodes you listen to. It really does help get us new listeners. And we'd love your feedback. We'd love to know what you're liking. Is there anything we could do better? Are there any topics you want to hear us talk about? So we hope you enjoy this episode and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.